To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff.
I'm voting for the man that's going to take America back, baby. Donald J. Trump, man.
What's one of your biggest issues?
Probably going to be inflation, because I sell T-shirts and all that stuff.
Your T-shirts are made in the USA?
No, my blanks, no. See, that's the thing Trump's talking about. If we tax them, hit tariffs, the same item they're making over there will cost the same to make over here.
The European Union is almost as bad as China. They don't accept your cars. They don't accept your farm products, but they send their farm products here, and they send their cars here by the millions and millions. So if China or any other country charges 100 or 200% tax, then we will charge them 100 or 200% tax in return. It's called an eye for an eye, and it'll all stop.
Well, the companies pay the tariffs, not us.
China doesn't pay the tariffs. We do when they come in.
No, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, mate, it does work like that. Tariffs make the price of imported goods more expensive. The importer pays a tax, and that cost is passed on to the consumer. The idea is it's bad for the exporting country because consumers might not want to pay that much and will shop for domestic products instead. But if the consumer still buys the product, they are paying a higher price.
China exports stuff to us and then we tariff them, right? We, as an importer of Chinese goods, pay for the tariffs, not China. I think that's what the most important fact that people need to understand is that the company exporting the product does not pay for the tariff.
China, as well as our allies and partners, will respond with their own set of tariffs on us, and therefore now we have this global trade war.
It's a very bad policy prescription, first of all, and do I believe it? I'm not sure.
New Zealand producers and exporters and trade negotiators will be anxiously waiting to see whether the President-elect Donald Trump follows through with his pledge to hit all imports into the US with a 10 to 20% tariff. He has also signalled tariffs of 60 to 100% for goods from China.
We are not the target of this.
We might not be the target, but we might just be collateral damage in a global economic war.
There's quite a lot of nervousness amongst the people that I've spoken to that, it wasn't great last time, but this time it could be worse. Some of the decision making could get more and more extreme. That's a big risk to the US as well as the global economy and to countries like New Zealand.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, so many questions about the fire Donald Trump has lit under world trade with his talk of whacking tariffs on everyone. What will the move do to the global economy? Do Americans understand what's going on? Does Trump understand what's going on? Is it really going to happen? I called trade expert John Ballingall from Sense Partners to explain, and he was already on the spot in Washington, D.C.
I come over every year to speak to some colleagues over here, and it just so happens that this year I'm here at a very interesting time to talk about trade policy. So I've got various meetings lined up with officials from US government agencies and with other economists, and I'm really just trying to get a lay of the land to understand how this election might affect New Zealand and what advice I can give to my clients.
And what's the vibe so far?
I would say the vibe is one of uncertainty, despite that there having been a Trump administration previously. I think there's a sense that this time it's a bit different, at least when it comes to things like trade policy. And there's a fair amount of frantic scrambling to try and think about what the incoming president might do and how countries might respond to it.
I've seen one comment that the best we can hope for is to fly under the radar.
I think that would be a pretty good outcome, to be honest. And in terms of the proposed trade policy, we are not the target of this. When President Trump talks about wanting to rebalance trade and stop people ripping off the US, he's not talking about New Zealand. We account for just 0.2% of all of the US's imports from the world. So we're not a big player. But unfortunately, it's entirely possible that we get caught in the crossfires when the US is taking action against some of the bigger players like China.
Here's the ANZ's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, talking to journalist Bernard Hickey. She's the one who made that comment about flying under the radar.
The US has actually passed Australia to become New Zealand's second largest trading partner. It accounts for about 13% of our goods exports. That was nearly $9 billion in the last 12 months, and around a quarter of our services exports at $7.4 billion. So it is a very big market.
So what is our biggest export to the US?
Our biggest goods export is beef, and we export just over $2 billion worth, and much of that goes into McDonald's burgers.
We sell quite a lot of beef for burgers in frozen form. So Americans quite like their burgers, and they probably wouldn't be pleased to see a price increase there.
So that's our largest export, but we also export significant amounts of lamb, of wine. It's our biggest market. Dairy products, kiwi fruit, apples, honey, fish, mussels. So it's a really, really important market. It's our second largest export market after China. And $1 in every $6 of export revenue we generate is from sales to the US. So it's a big deal.
What happens if US agricultural producers take advantage of this movement to sort of say, slap those tariffs on New Zealand products?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty about how some of the rhetoric that Trump campaigned on, how that might play out in reality.
The first thing we learned from the first Trump administration is that, yes, he does deliver on his promises, and yes, there will be tariffs, but it's all the details that matter. And to get to those details, you're going to go through a period of chaotic policy making where you're going to have some pretty heated debates between his advisors, who often come from pretty different philosophical camps.
But I think the direction of travel is clear. He loves tariffs. He's the tariff man, self-described.
Tariff. I am a tariff man.
And I think we can expect to see tariffs on imports from New Zealand and all other countries. Quite at what level, it's not clear. But what is clear is that it's about to get more difficult to do business with the US. How that will play out, it's far too early to tell because we don't know what tariffs he might put on, whether or not any countries might be exempted from them, whether or not any individual companies might get exemptions from them. There's so much uncertainty, and the uncertainty itself is problematic because it soaks up a lot of resources for New Zealand exporters trying to work out what on earth is going on.
Yeah, and it's not like we can actually take Trump at his word. He just says stuff, right?
He does say a lot. And, we know from last time around that not everything he says he does. But he is, and always has been, very strong about tariffs. He thinks that they are paid by foreign countries, not by importers into the US. He thinks that they'll raise a lot of money that he can then use to fund tax cuts, for example. And he fundamentally believes that the US needs to punish countries who he feels have been ripping off the US for a long time.
Everything. She said, I'm going to impose a sales tax on the people. No, I'm going to impose a tariff on the outside world.
So whilst we shouldn't get too carried away with his rhetoric, past practice when he was last president does suggest that he will follow through in some shape or form on making it harder to sell to the US.
And no one's going to take him aside and explain how tariffs work?
My understanding is that many have tried, many have failed. He simply doesn't want to know.
Wow.
So that is a hugely challenging aspect of this, in that you won't meet an economist. Well, you won't meet many economists who would agree with what he's suggesting.
Build your plant in the United States and you don't have any tariffs.
Yet he will not be dissuaded from his view that tariffs are a great idea and will be really important for the U.S. economy.
I will never apologize for defending America. I will protect our workers. I will protect our jobs. I will protect our borders. I will protect our families.
So, we might hope that people that he trusts, people who are experienced, that they might try to talk him through some of these issues and explain that he needs to be really careful what he wishes for by imposing lots of tariffs. But I'm not overly confident that they'll have any great success.
So let's assume some form of Trump's tariffs will happen. The number one issue with them for consumers is inflation, as Yahoo Business describes here.
There's growing concern that inflation could actually tick even higher under President-elect Donald Trump's policies. The president-elect has proposed a 10 to 20% tax on all goods imported into the U.S. and a 60% tariff on all goods coming from China. Economists say that that's likely to could potentially create a lot of pain here for the average American.
You know, the average voter in any country doesn't think a lot about trade policy, and that's probably a good thing. But when it is explained to them that a tariff is just a tax and that it's not actually the foreign country that pays for it, it will lead to higher prices at the supermarket, at Walmart,
at
for
McDonald's.
Your business. At McDonald's. But when those sort of things are explained, then some will think a bit more critically about it. But there are a lot of people who will just say, look, if President Trump says it's a good thing, then I'm okay with it. And as much as we might not like that, and as much as we can present evidence and economic analysis and logic, they're not going to be persuaded. So that's what makes it particularly challenged. This is not really an evidence-based debate. It's much more about the feels and the vibes, and those are probably not in New Zealand's favour at the moment.
I've also seen commentary from Americans that it doesn't matter because he's going to save us $30,000 a year in tax we're not going to be paying. So who cares if it's $5 extra for a T-shirt? But once again, who knows if Americans will save $30,000 a year in tax?
Yeah. I mean, it's not at all clear how large any tax cuts might be and whether or not they're going to come to income tax or to corporate tax, which is what he did last time. And so, there is some truth to the fact he might introduce some tax cuts that benefit people. But what we do know is that the tariffs are felt most keenly by the poorer parts of society, because poorer households tend to spend proportionately more of their income on things at Walmart that are imported from China and other places, whereas richer households tend to spend more on services that aren't attracting a tariff. So these tariffs hurt poor households the most. And we've just had an election where a key aspect of the debate was around the cost of living and inflation. And these tariffs will be inflationary. They will put up prices in the US.
The Yale Budget Lab estimates that will raise consumer prices by up to 5.1%. And for the average household in the U.S., that would amount to $7,600 every year based on the share of imports in GDP and the price increments associated with that.
So maybe that's the argument that could dissuade Trump from doing anything too extreme. But again, I'm not overly confident that he's interested in logic and facts.
As far as New Zealand's concerned, we could hope that Trump acts against China first and pauses on the rest of the world. What are the chances of that happening?
If he wants to make it all about China, he can just focus on China. But that's not what he's been saying during the campaign. That's part of it. But he is also grumpy at other countries, Germany, Mexico, a whole range of countries that he feels don't buy enough US products and sell the US too much stuff. So I suspect the action's going to be a bit wider this time around. Although, speaking to some experts today, their sense was he might move on China first because he's already done that in the past. They already have systems in place to be able to do that. But then tariffs on other countries might come in slower time. But it's all very uncertain.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
No wonder Ferris Bueller took the day off. But yes, in 1930, President Hoover ignored the experts to sign a bill raising already heavy duties by 20%.
Henry Ford, called it economic stupidity, and more than 1,000 economists signed a petition asking the president to veto the bill.
To be sure, if you put such high tariffs on that you completely crater your domestic economy, then households aren't going to be spending very much. People will get laid off from their jobs. Businesses won't invest very much because they won't have high profits. And those things could lead to lower prices, but it's a really stupid way of trying to get deflation. You know, he positioned himself as someone who makes the economy grow faster. So he doesn't want to crater the US economy for the sake of it. But to think that a 20% tax on everything that's imported would somehow cause prices to go down is just fanciful. It's illogical. There's no evidence to support it. All the evidence is to the contrary. So let's be really clear. Tariffs will cause higher prices. It's just a fact. In reality, prices might not go up by 20%. They might say to the exporter, I think you should bear some of this cost as well. So in reality, the cost of a tariff is shared between the exporter and the importer. Precisely how much is impossible to know in advance. Depends on the product, depends on the country, depends on the importer.
Kiwi winemakers are anxiously waiting to see if and when they'll be hit by high tariffs exporting into the US following the election of Donald Trump. And with the US market accounting for some 40% of New Zealand's wine exports, it could be devastating for the industry here.
You know, there's 2 months to go before the new administration is sworn in. Nobody knows if tariffs will be applied, if they are, how much, when. So there's very little that anybody can do at the moment other than watch and wait to see what happens.
If it's rolled out as Trump has suggested, it will lead to slower global growth. It will lead to a slowdown in income growth in lots and lots of our markets. And in general, that means they will buy less of what we produce. They will make cutbacks, that they will, stop eating so much lamb or dairy products. They might substitute that for less expensive food, or so you get all of these knock-on effects, and it all points to a period of instability and uncertainty, which is it's pretty daunting.
Can you put a tariff on digital goods and services? Internet subscriptions, that kind of thing?
Generally, tariffs are placed on goods rather than services. So it would be unlikely, I think, that there would be additional taxes placed on services. And, that is perhaps a silver lining in this cloud is that our services exports to the US are really, really big, about $7 billion every year. And those are unlikely to face tariffs. He's not really worried about service trade. He's worried about manufacturing, and he's worried about agriculture. He's not worried about us selling zero subscriptions or US tourists coming to New Zealand for a holiday. So that aspect should be hopefully unscathed. But again, they will suffer from a slower US economy and a slower global economy. If your household income gets hit by having to pay more for everything that you buy at Walmart or at the supermarket, you're less likely to have disposable income to go on holiday to New Zealand. So our services exports won't escape, but that will be mainly due to slower economic activity around the world rather than any form of tariff or tax.
What about our companies that have very close connections with the US, like Rocket Lab, like Xero?
Well, they will have been preparing for this eventuality. I have absolutely no doubt. That could help them if they've got friends in the right places. There's some evidence to suggest that companies who are close to key decision makers within the last Trump administration, that they tended to get exemptions from tariffs or get a slightly better deal and might be able to influence decision making somewhat. It will be tricky because it's obviously not just New Zealand businesses that will be trying to get the ear of the president and his team. It's companies from all around the world, and many of them are a lot bigger than our exporters. I know our embassy here in Washington have been preparing for this eventuality. They will have some plans in place, some strategies in place to try and promote New Zealand's cause as best they can. And, we've been here before. We've got a sense of the strategies that might work and those which are less effective. And I am confident that our team up here will be doing a fantastic job to try and promote New Zealand's interests. It's just going to be a tough period.
They could make him a little tiny pair of possum wool gloves for his little hands. Butter him up that way.
Well, one option that I've been floating around is whether or not we open up a swathe of land for him to build a nice golf course somewhere in the South Island. He could build some apartments and some condominiums. It'll be tremendous. It'll be the best golf course you've ever seen in the world. And as much as you're laughing, I'm only sort of saying this in half jest because he is a very transactional president. He likes to make the deal. He likes to know what's in it for him. So look, we might have to have some creative thinking to try and promote New Zealand's cause.
New Zealand in the 1960s and 70s was a big fan of protectionist measures such as agricultural subsidies and tariffs, but that had to change.
In the early 1980s, we ran into a whole lot of fiscal trouble. We had a balance of payments crisis. So as a result of that, and the prevailing wisdom at the time was tariffs are bad, you should just get rid of them. So it was generally accepted then that removing your own tariffs would be good for you. It would allow resources to go where they need to in the economy. It would be more efficient. Your firms would become more competitive because they weren't hidden behind tariff barriers. That was the theory at the time, and that theory was quite persuasive to people in the New Zealand Treasury in particular. And as a consequence of that and our fiscal crisis, where we simply couldn't afford to keep subsidising farmers, we gradually got rid of nearly all of our tariffs, and that has steadily continued over the past 20 or 30 years. We've either reduced them on all countries or we've reduced them to zero in our free trade agreements with other countries. So right now, we have almost no tariffs of any consequence. I think we raise about $170 million through tariffs, and we don't rely on them for revenue or to protect our businesses, really. What is true is that New Zealand is always massively affected by what other countries do. We're massively affected by decisions made in Beijing, in Washington, in Brussels. So that's nothing new. And we are always buffeted around by these global shocks, as we say in economic jargon. So it's nothing particularly new. It's just this one is particularly uncertain and comes at a particularly unwelcome time. We've just recovered from COVID. The inflationary effects are starting to ease off. We've got decent growth. Unemployment's not too bad. Interest rates are coming down. And suddenly a big spanner comes in the works, potentially.
And if you think we'll just have to wait out the next 4 years until Trump's time is up, think again.
About the only thing that both major parties can agree on, a real bipartisan issue, is the fact that China is bad. And we need to try and use tariffs and other measures to try and get them to change their ways. And both the Democrats and the Republicans firmly believe this. So there's little chance of these tariffs changing in a hurry.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Mark Chesterman and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to John Bellingall. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.